I've always been drawn towards model making as a hobby and have a particular interest in fantasy and science fiction models. Growing up in the 1960s and 70s, there were a number of commercially produced model kits available which I collected and built, often with more enthusiasm than skill. My room was littered with spacecraft and monsters. I did venture into the world of scratch building, but for many years didn't take my interest far. I didn't have very much in the way of resources, was no good at woodwork or moulding techniques, which were still pretty expensive in those days. As a Doctor Who fan, the TARDIS was a good model to make. It was square, so I didn't need to worry about difficult curved shapes and could easily be stored or displayed, as most of its surface area was vertical. I made a series of tiny TARDIS models in the days of back garden adventures. When a larger card and plastic model was produced in the 1970s, I couldn't afford one, but it did give me the idea to start making them in a scale more relevant to an action man, slightly over a foot tall. Reference material was scarce in the days before the internet and home video. Many of these attempts were wildly inaccurate, but I kept going. Eventually, they improved. I was also experimenting with making original scratch-built or kit-bashed models for short film projects in the days when the only affordable recording medium was Super 8 film. That wasn't very practical, as the camera I had couldn't focus on anything closer than 2 feet or 60 centimetres. Once I became involved in a local Doctor Who group in the 1980s, I found myself branching out, making other kinds of display models for conventions and exhibitions. It was in the early 1990s that I accepted a commission to build a studio-scale replica of the starship Liberator from the TV series Blake 7. What I hadn't thought about was how to build it. As I'm sure you may have realised by now, the Liberator is slightly outside my comfort zone because it's not square, it isn't blue, and it doesn't have a lamp on its roof. While trying to fathom out how I was going to build it, I first decided to draw up a scale plan to see if that would help me. I knew the finished model also had to be capable of being disassembled for storage. I eventually arrived at a model with an approximate length of 44 inches or 102 centimetres and a height of 19.5 inches or 50 centimetres. I decided that the 3 struts and pods would slot into the main body and the rear globe would fit into the back of the model, the entire assembly being supported on a stand. This was to be made from wood and painted black. I gathered as much reference material as I could find, including an excellent plan in the SF magazine Space Voyager, photos of the ship where I could find them in various magazines, the Corgi die-cast model, well, any port in a storm, right? And one really useful item, an excellent if somewhat small model kit produced by Comet Miniatures. This served as the best guide to help me adjust the proportions of the model to the larger scale. Once the plan was completed and the method of assembly devised, I looked for anything I could buy to adapt for the various sections of the ship. I soon realised I couldn't find anything suitable enough and was faced with the prospect of somehow having to mould and cast the entire model. After a few tests, I opted to make sections of the model using artist's board, thin card and plastic card, reinforced with household filler and sanded down until smooth. Sealed with model paint and sanded over again, I then cast the parts in plaster of Paris and painted the finished moulds to seal the surface. I had no idea about release agents, so opted to use petroleum jelly before applying layers of glass fibre. I used lots of it just to make sure. I also overcompensated with how much fiberglass to use, so each cast ended up really thick and heavy, but it was strong. My budget release agent worked, but left the surface very marked and pitted, so each moulded section had to be extensively sanded down before it was usable. Then they were superglued together and proved to be very robust. Completed sections were primed with enamel model paint and fine sanded to allow for final detailing and painting. The 3 support arms were made from wood and artist's mounting board, so that part of the process was less labour intensive. During this time I had one major piece of good luck. An exhibition was held in nearby Sunderland of Martin Bowers models, a selection of replica craft from classic TV shows such as Thunderbirds, some genuine screen-used props and models, and the restored Liberator model as used in the Blake 7 TV series itself. I was able to photograph the model with my stills camera, which proved invaluable in helping me to see exactly what surface detail the model had when seen in close-up. Meanwhile, I had to abandon the idea of a translucent green dome at the back of the model and opt for a solid shape instead. I just couldn't work out how to cast it in a material where it could be made to glow like its TV counterpart, and the lamp the effects team used in the actual model hadn't been available for years. Finally, with everything moulded, I could start to look at the construction of the stand, a relatively straightforward process built around the model as the structure began to fit together. I made some stencils for detailing and painting and set about completing the model. Old net curtains proved useful for texturing. Once cut, glued to small sections and painted gold, they looked like metallic mesh. Thin metal rods bought at a local art store were used for the fine details at the front of the 3 pods. Other details were made from plastic card or artist's board. Thin painted strips were glued to the green dome and added to the model where needed elsewhere. Shading was hand-painted using a series of plastic card stencils, following the patterns evident in the photos, guesstimating the details for areas I wasn't sure of. After many months, the model was finally finished. Despite my misgivings, I actually thought the model looked pretty good upon completion, and it was well received. Of course, I went straight into therapy afterwards, with some comfort builds. Some of my old models do still survive. The TARDIS console, made from plastic card, is now very brittle and reminiscent of the actual studio prop's last appearance in the 1970 John Pertwee serial, Inferno. Sadly, after being sat on at an exhibition, the full-sized K9 didn't survive and has been reduced to his ears. It was also made from artist's board, and though it looked sturdy, it was actually very fragile. I hope you've enjoyed this look at some of my old misadventures in scratch building.